On today's show, the Hawks have now lost 3 games in a row as they fall in back-to-back games to Washington in disappointing fashion. Yes, they were banged up in this game, but the Hawks did not play well at all. We'll dive into how they struggled in this spot, especially defensively, and much more as well as context, nuance, etc. It's all coming up right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1835 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening into Thursday here at the end of October. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. Kick off the season right now and we get a big return at FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and actually get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I also want to tell you at the top of the podcast, as I always do, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Please check us out and subscribe anywhere you find your podcasts. We're on Apple. We're on Spotify. We're also on YouTube. Please like this video as you are watching it and subscribe on both audio and video platforms. And today's podcast will focus on what became a pretty disappointing loss for the Hawks in Washington, D.C., 133-120 in the end, and that is pretty indicative to some degree of how this game went. Of course, it was a rematch of the game on Monday. In between that, the Hawks had a lot of different injury issues that we'll talk about later on in this podcast, but it was a slow start for Atlanta. They were down by 13 points in the first quarter. Then they actually had a great stretch in this game in which they were basically, getting back into things. They were up by as many as double digits in this spot. That's where the Wizards were by 23 points in about a 12-minute period. And then the second half was absolutely disastrous for Atlanta. And I don't use that word lightly. It was really an actual disaster after halftime. They allowed 76 points. They had this stretch in the middle of the third quarter to the middle of the fourth quarter, about a quarter's worth of basketball where they went from being up by 9 to being down by 17 in a game against a pretty bad opponent. And that was the ballgame. So as we always do on the show, I'll give you some big picture takeaways, my analysis at the front of the podcast. And as we get into the middle of the show, my more like play-by-play observations, news and notes throughout the podcast. And then at the end of the show, we'll dive into the players and how they performed individually in this spot. But if you missed the show yesterday, I did talk about injuries extensively on episode 1834. It dropped on Tuesday evening and all of the roster challenges associated with that. That was a long discussion of that, so I'm not going to rehash it all right now. But in the end, the Hawks were missing a lot of different guys in this game. I'm just going to say who they were missing, just for context purposes. Dyson Daniels was not playing in this game. Bogey is out for a while, as is Kobe Buffkin, as is Vit Krejci. That is 4 guys who they missed badly. And then DeAndre Hunter, who was questionable for this game, we'll come back to him later on in the podcast for some more details on that, did not end up playing. So they were without 5 guys who I would describe as key pieces to varying degrees, including 3 of their top 5-6 players, basically, on the perimeter. So it's obviously a challenge. And all of that stands, plus no Hunter in this game, so it's even worse than it could have been individually. And the available roster in this game, if we're being honest, was not very good. And that's an important piece of context. Now, does that excuse everything? No. So don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying the Hawks played well. I'm not saying the Hawks should have lost, because that's not the case. The Hawks were favored in this game by 5 points, according to our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. That is a good indicative projection. I know not everyone is married to the betting markets. I'm not saying you have to be, but it's usually a good baseline about expectations coming into a game. And the Hawks were favored in this game still, despite all those injuries. At the same time, I don't know how good this team is. In fact, I know they're pretty bad in their current lineup. On one hand, they have the 2 best players on the floor, in my opinion, in Trae Young and Jalen Johnson. So that's obviously an advantage in their favor. But after that, the roster this is not a playoff team or anything close to it with the available team that they had tonight. Not even close. So that's worth keeping in mind. They were missing 4 of their top 5 ball handlers and 4 of their top 5 or 6 perimeter defenders in the same game. Hard to do. But they still should have played better than this. So that's the number one top line takeaway. And the Wizards are not very good. Now, they obviously are talented. They have young guys who are talented. They're very, very, very young. And they shot it well in this game. And they were playing with confidence, all that stuff. But they're not a very good basketball team, I think. I do think that some of the reactions that I've seen, predictably, I'm not criticizing anyone, have been a little bit overboard. It's early in the year. This is kind of staying in my brand, but I'm going to probably tell you at the end of the day not to panic too much about this performance. And they're some of that kind of ignores the injury stuff, et cetera. Or maybe they're just acting like the sky is falling. It is what it is. But my job on the show is to give you my analysis, soberly, basically, about what transpired and what will transpire in the future. It is more than fair to say the Hawks did not play up to the standard they need to play to in this game. Even when you include the nuance and the context, they did not play well enough in this game. Most of the second half was truly ugly stuff, particularly on the defensive end of the floor. And you don't want to dig a hole early in the season. So, it feels like a lifetime ago, but a week ago, the Hawks were 2-0 and feeling pretty good, and they were healthy, or healthy-ish. And now they're really banged up, and they've lost 3 games in a row. So, the vibe going off the cliff is not unexpected or unwarranted to some degree. And yeah, you can't help injuries. I understand that there's criticism of the training staff. It doesn't matter. It's a new training staff. You don't want to oversay that right now. Obviously they're cluster injuries. Nobody can afford this. Even as much as I've built out and talked about how the Hawks built out their depth this year a lot more, and they did. I did say this summer even, what you can never afford. No team can afford cluster injuries at the same position, and the Hawks have that right now. Again, though, you have to win games against bad teams. You have to. And the Hawks going 0-2 against the Wizards, even with all the context in the world, is not a thing that they can afford to do. And it's 2 games out of 82, but you got to beat bad teams. And they lost both games to the Wizards. The first loss against OKC is supposed to happen. Big underdogs, etc. But you cannot go 0-2 against the Wizards, even with context that I just gave you. I am the biggest advocate of that in the world. I will always give you all of the context, all of the reasoning, all of the explanations that I possibly can. And yeah, they're getting killed by injuries, but you can't lose to the Wizards twice in 3 days. So that's the top line thought. As for this game, to me, this is very obviously, especially after watching the game again, but even the first time I watched the game, very obviously a defensive loss for the Hawks. Now, that does not mean the offense was perfect, because it wasn't by any stretch of the imagination. But I'll raise my hand on this. I focus more on the potential offensive challenges and the lack of ball handling and the lack of shooting than the defense pregame and on Twitter and my write-ups, etc. And that was a mistake, because defensively it was much worse than the offense. The offensive stuff did show up, but defensively that was the problem, and that's what lost them the game in my mind. So they had a 126 defensive rating. That alone is very, very bad, in case you were wondering. And honestly an unbelievable 149 defensive rating in the second half of this game. The Wizards shot 53% from the field this game, 42% from 3. And yeah, some of that was still hot shooting. I spent a little bit of time at the end of the podcast yesterday talking about how teams have been hot against the Hawks from 3 and how some of that's the Hawks, some of it's unlucky. More of that today. The Wizards got a lot of open shots. They made them. They made a lot of them, but still, it was well beyond unlucky from the Hawks. They played poorly defensively in this game. 32 assists. The only thing the Hawks basically didn't do terribly defensively was defensive rebound. They were okay there. But when they actually did give up offensive rebounds, the Wizards took advantage of that. And they had 19 second chance points in this game. The Hawks got killed in transition in this one. The Wizards had 93rd percentile offensive efficiency in transition. They had 25 fast break points. Part of that can be traced to the offense not being very good, because poor offense usually does fuel bad defense in transition. That is certainly worth pointing out. But even when things were slowed down, the Wizards had really strong half-court offense in this game, which is indicative of your bad defense in a lot of different ways. The Wizards had a 108 offensive rating in the half-court, which is in the 85th percentile. That can't happen against a young team that is not very good. They have some talent, to be sure, but the Hawks did not play well defensively. And yes, no Dyson Daniels, who, again, is a godsend defensively. No Hunter, who I know is controversial, but is obviously a solid enough defender. No Veet, even Kobe. You would expect the defense to be a lot worse. Personnel-wise, it was not good defensively in this game. But it fell off a cliff. And honestly, the only time they actually got stops in this game was when the rookie, Zaccharie Risacher, was on the court. They had a 111 defensive rating with Risacher on the floor in this game, which isn't elite. That's totally fine. It was every time he sat on the bench, they could not get stops. It was jarring. It was terrible. And it's crazy for a rookie to be your best perimeter defender, but he was. Other than Keaton Wallace, who certainly is good, but in a smaller role in this game. Trae is one of those guys, but the on-off numbers showed that. Trae struggled. I thought David Roddy and Garrison Matthews were both very bad defensively, especially Roddy in this game. Trae wore down as the game went along very visibly. Even Quinn said that post-game, he got tired. That was very clear. He's carrying this massive workload. Jalen's defense has not been very good this year, in my opinion, and neither center played well, Okongwu or Capella. So that's a lot of bad, and that's what happened on the floor. Basically the only guy I would say that played to what you expect defensively, other than Keaton Wallace, was Risacher. And that's a bad place to be. So overall, defensively, it was, catastrophes maybe a little bit too strong, but it was quite bad, and that led to the loss in some ways. I'll be short on the offense. It wasn't very good. They had a 113 offensive rating. It was better than the defense. Trae had 35 and 15 assists. Like, that's obviously fantastic. But it was mostly the first half where he was actually brilliant. The first half, he really was. He got tired. That was very obvious. And the workload led to some slippage there. The Hawks also, once again, got outshot from three. Attempts were up. They took 39 attempts. That's actually fine, but only made 12 of them. They have a shooting issue right now without Bogey. And yeah, Garrison helps, but no Bogey, even no Hunter is a good shooter. Like, that's a real loss for them as a shooter. Spacing is a problem right now. And then basically offensively, like they shot the ball really well from 2-point range and especially at the rim, but 17 turnovers is not good enough. They did not run like Washington did in this game, in part because they couldn't get stops. So it's always a feedback loop. But the offense was actually not worse than I thought it was going to be. There were times where it was really bad, especially in the second half. But on the whole, they did enough for close to it offensively. When you factor in Trae being pretty much almost perfect in the first half, Jalen was fine offensively, ended up with some big numbers, but not very efficient. The centers were not great in this game again. Roddy is a pretty interesting offensive player, but anyway, we'll get into the individual stuff later on. But my takeaway watching this game twice now is that the defense was really, really, really the problem, and offensively it wasn't good, but it wasn't a disaster. So, look, big picture. I said it once before. I'll say it again. You cannot lose these 2 games in a row to the Wizards. I will also stress that it's 2 games, and especially tonight. Like, the one that honestly should bother me more is Monday, even though it was a back-to-back, because that was a more full-strength team. This game, without Dyson in particular, was extremely valuable to them. Like, this is a roster loss and a defensive loss, and it was bad, and it's not a good performance. But, it's the bigger deal, honestly, and this is not what anybody wants to hear. The bigger deal is that they're going to be dealing with this stuff for a while. Like, obviously, there's a hope that Dyson and or Hunter are back in the near future, and that would help a lot. Don't get me wrong. But you're playing without Bogey for a long time. Bogey's a very important player. There is no way, if I had known Bogey was going to miss a month plus, that I would have projected the Hawks for 42 wins. Like, I wouldn't have said that. Like, it's obviously a possibility, but like, that's a big, big, big loss. And then Veet and Kobe are a little bit less so, but they don't have ball handling. So again, if you missed it, listen to the show yesterday for more long-term stuff on the injury stuff, on the reports there, the updates, the projections, etc. But for today's game, and we'll get into the individual stuff later on, it was rough, man. There's no excuses. Like, people always use the word excuses, and I won't do a jag on this right now, but it's not an excuse to just point out the context. Like, the Hawks are playing with a roster that is not good enough. But one more time, last time for now, it was a bad performance. Both can be true at the same time, and it was in this game. All right, we'll have more to come on this game. Unfortunately, I appreciate everybody listening to the podcast because it's sort of a dismal one to talk about. We'll get into how the game unfolded in the middle, my more granular observations along the way, and at the end of the podcast, some of my player-by-player evaluations, plus the latest on DeAndre Hunter's knee and the questions around that. But first, a word from our partners on the show. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready to tackle the NFL and NBA action this season with FanDuel. FanDuel's America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, if you're a new customer, you can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is so easy to use. It gives you everything that you actually need to place your bets all in one place. And they have all stuff that you're looking for across the sports betting space, from over-unders to point spreads to money lines, player props, future bets, same-game parlays, live betting, and so much more. The app is safe and secure at FanDuel. They cover the entire range of sports as well. Of course, the NBA is the focus of this podcast. That's a offering at FanDuel, plus the NFL, college football, MLB, WNBA, hockey, golf, tennis, college sports, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and so much more. Now's an awesome time to sign up with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. And the place to go is FanDuel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel. That's FanDuel.com, and $150 bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, so as I teased out before the break, the Hawks did have one strong stretch, which we'll get to in a second, but a rough start to this one. They were actually down 6-0 at the outset. They missed their first 5 threes. There was a great set of moves by Risacher against Alex Sarr in the 1-versus-2 battle. Couple minutes into the game, couple of fakes, and I stepped through for a bucket with his left hand. And Risacher was a bright spot in this game overall. He had some rookie moments, to be sure, like he's going to have, but he was, I think, pretty good. The Hawks were actually down 24-11 mid-first quarter, with the Wizards shooting about 70% from the field at that point in time. And I think this is a theme throughout, but it's in my notes for early in the game. Their transition defense was really bad at the outset. I think Roddy in particular was kind of like lighting stuff on fire in a bad way defensively throughout this one, especially in the first half at times. Rotationally, just to note this now, they started Roddy, which before the game, I basically said, look, there are 4 guys I'm confident are probably going to start this game, and it was Trae, it was Risacher, Jalen, and Capella, from what I had heard. And the 5th starter spot was up for grabs. So basically, I thought it could be Garrison, could be Roddy, could be Larry Nance at the 4, could have even been Keaton Wallace. But in the end, it was Roddy. And I think part of that is they wanted Garrison to play when they played 2 bigs, but also they just didn't play Garrison that much in this game. Roddy played 32 minutes. So they like him more than I do right now, I think. They went to Garrison, though, when Nance came in for the first time in his Hawks tenure at the 4. But as we'll circle back to later on, I think tonight Quinn basically announced with his actions, not his words, but with his actions, that they do not want to play Nance at the 4. Because Nance very obviously needed to play in this game, and he played 7 minutes. Because the Hawks, I think Quinn and the staff do not view him as a 5. They view him as a 5, not a 4. That was my read on the situation tonight. Anyway, the Hawks did wake up after going down 13 early on, a 15-2 run mid-quarter to tie the game. Trae was really on fire in the first quarter, had 14 points and 4 assists. He had a 3, actually kind of a weird play where he was very obviously fouled. He kind of stopped waiting for the foul call, didn't get it, and then shot a kind of like a circus shot and made it. So that was weird. But only 8 guys played in the first quarter, and then they went to Keaton Wallace, who was the 9th guy. They only had 10 available to play in this game, and Mo Gay was the 10th. He did not play. Everybody else did, including Keaton. Keaton was the first and only backup point guard in this game, as you might imagine. They used the first time when Trae sat Roddy, Risacher, and Jalen around Keaton Wallace for ball handling. All 3 of those guys are ball handlers to some degree. On one hand, you might want Garrison for his shooting. On the other, Garrison's not a ball handler. And Keaton Wallace can handle the ball a little bit, but he's more of a combo, as I've said before. So having more playmaking around him is probably a good idea in general. I will say Roddy did have some nice moments offensively in this game, using his physicality, especially in the first half. And overall, it's going to sound crazy in a game that they lost by 13 points, but the Hawks had a 37-14 run overall in the first half. There was Jalen finding Risacher for a dunk, Jalen finding Capella for a dunk to force a timeout, and they went from basically down 13 to up by 10 in like 11 minutes. They won the non-Trae minutes for the first time in a while in that first stint with Keaton. Couldn't won a challenge to actually take some points off the board, at least the free throws off the board against Washington. There was one of the more absurd official reviews you'll ever see on Garrison. Just made a very normal contest on a fast break against Bub Carrington. It was a foul, but he got a lot of ball. Like it was what I'd say it was much closer to a clean block than it was to a flagrant foul. And that was a crazy review that I'm not sure why they even reviewed that. And apparently the Wizards broadcast was acting like it was should have been a flagrant. I can't believe that. I watched the replay like 10 times. There's nothing there. Anyway, moments later, Garrison actually got a flagrant foul that was kind of earned. A play that they always call sometimes in that way. No real impact. But it was kind of chippy at the end of the first half. There was some double technical fouls actually from Risacher and Jordan Poole kind of going out a little bit. Not anything malicious, but just kind of chirping a little and pushing and shoving. But the Hawks were up by 8 points at halftime. Feels like it was a long time ago, honestly. They didn't shoot well in the first half. They were 4 of 20 from 3. The Hawks actually made more threes in the second half and shot better from 3 in the second half than in the first half, but everything else was worse after halftime. So it started right away, honestly. In the third quarter, it was an ugly start. So Trae misses a 3 at the outset. They get a fast break. Carrington gets fouled by Trae. Trae then gets a technical foul, ends up being a 4-point possession for Washington right away. And then Risacher dribbles to nowhere, turns it over. It was largely, honestly, it could have been worse for the Hawks early in the third quarter because the Hawks did not play well at all, but the Wizards couldn't make a shot for like 5 minutes. That was it. But Young got a technical foul. Like it was just kind of messy the entire second half, really. They went to Keaton with Trae and Garrison. That didn't work out very well, I would say. They're small, and Keaton actually got his first bucket of his NBA career and shot it well in this game and played well. I like what he gave them in the spot. There was confusion about the score for a large portion of the third quarter. Like the box score that the Hawks broadcast was using on FanDuel Sports Network was wrong. And the NBA box score was kind of in and out being right and wrong. And I guess it was an official scoring issue, but it got corrected. It was just kind of strange. But the Hawks gave up 36 points in the third quarter. It was a poor quarter. They got drilled in the possession battle in the third quarter on the whole. But hey, at the end of that, I kind of made in my notes like, all right, they avoided total disaster. They're only down 1. And then they go to the fourth quarter, and it was even worse. So, for one, at the very end of the third quarter, Valanciunas kind of went and took it to Okongwu for a few minutes. 10 points, kind of overwhelmed with his size a little bit. I will note that it wasn't like the Wizards were dominating the actual game, like the score, which is what matters. But JV got some buckets. It got attention on this, but I was talking about this even before that. And I spent some time on this on the show on Monday night as well. So if you're listening to that show, you will be familiar with this. I hesitate to pile on this because I think it gets overblown sometimes. I did not understand Quinn Snyder's center usage in this game. And some people, I'm sure, will be thinking different things when I say that. I saw a lot of reactions. On one hand, there's always a contingent of people that thinks Clint Capella is bad and useless and shouldn't play. That's silly in my opinion, but that's one side. The other side that I heard from today was that Okongwu's too small. He can't play against Valanciunas. It's not really about either one of those things. I am higher on Capella than most people are. It seems like that's fine. Even I will acknowledge, as I do repeatedly, he's a limited player at this point. He's not a perfect player. Okongwu was not very good in this game. I like him. He was not very good in this game. But my issue is I don't know why the Hawks are almost going out of their way to have, in 2 games in a row, basically, have Capella play against Alex Sarr and have Okongwu play against Jonas Valanciunas. That makes no sense at all. I'm sorry. That's simplified on purpose. But Quinn didn't really give an answer after the game. He was actually asked about it. I think it was by Lauren Williams after the game of the AJC, and didn't really give a straight answer. It was a bizarre kind of non-answer, which is normal, I guess. And look, it wouldn't fix everything by any means. But needless to say, like, Capella is going to be much more effective and comfortable against a big center like Valanciunas. Like, that's just very logical. And Okongwu was more effective against someone like Sarr. So it's not because of either player's weaknesses or whatever. I think it has more to do with Capella's weaknesses than Okongwu's. I think Okongwu has a better chance against Valanciunas than Capella does against Sarr. It's not about the fact that Sarr's going to cook you as a scorer, but Capella doesn't really do the things that you would want to do to space the floor, take advantage of that in the way that he maybe would have been able to in Houston or even early in Atlanta. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I'll stop now. I'll stop there for now. But like, also, they played Clint without Trae for a few minutes in the second half, which is insane. Like, I think you have to pretty much play Clint with Trae almost exclusively, especially right now with out of pick and roll ball handler. Like, Keaton Wallace is a guy I like, but he should not be playing with Clint. So that's a different show, I think, but it was a maddening thing in the second half. That's not why they lost, to be very clear. That's not why they lost, but it was kind of inexplicable. And that's the kind of stuff that really bothers me when it's like, I don't even understand what this could be. Usually I like to give you guys an explanation about what I think it could have been rationally from the coaching staff. I couldn't find one on this one. I don't really understand it. Anyway, the Hawks were also -6 with Trae on the bench in like a minute and 20 seconds in the second half. And then he came back in, which kind of, I'd say I understood that, but it probably added to him wearing out because he sat for literally a minute and a half in the whole second half until the very, very end of the game when it was over. So he was gassed. It didn't help when he came back in because he was tired and not playing very well. The Wizards had these 22-8 run to go up by 15 points, and they had 6 threes in 5 minutes. That was the one part of the game where it was like, come on, man. Like, every shot goes in suddenly for Washington. That's certainly what happened in that spot. And overall, here's the money stat. The run never came for the Hawks. So here it is. In the end, Washington outscored Atlanta over a 13-ish minute period by a score of 50-24 in roughly a quarter, a little bit more than a quarter's worth of play from mid-third to mid-fourth, 50-24. And that is where the Hawks lost this basketball game. Now, they weren't great before that, but they were playing fine. It was an even game at that point in time, and they got drilled for that much time. They went from, again, up by 9 to down by 17 in about 13 minutes. And that is the ball game. All right. That's all I have on the observations in this game. We'll come back in a second and talk about the player-by-player evaluations as well as a little bit of a look at DeAndre Hunter's knee and what's going on there. But first, a word from our partners on the show. All right, and before I dive into the players who actually appeared on the floor in this game on Wednesday, DeAndre Hunter, as I said before, was the guy who was questionable coming into the game. He did not play. He was on the trip. It was a one-game trip because they're playing again at home on Friday, so he went on the trip. It's his third straight game that he's missed. And notably, the Hawks changed his injury listing from right knee inflammation in the first 2 games to right knee injury management tonight. Now, logically, that doesn't make sense to me. I'll just be honest with you. If you want to have a positive reading, you could say, hey, if it's management versus an actual injury, management is better. That's a reasonable thing to think. If you want to read it as negative, you could say, the Hawks were in a pretty desperate situation tonight, roster-wise, with a ton of different guys out. It wasn't a back-to-back, and he still didn't play. And you almost never see injury management listing in the NBA when it isn't a back-to-back. So I candidly do not know. Quinn was not asked that I heard in pregame or postgame tonight about this. So I would say it's truly uncertain until we hear otherwise, or unless he's just off the injury report for Friday. If he plays Friday, that'd be nice. But the alarm bells are on for sure. Like the fact that he went on the trip is probably a good sign, but it was just weird. And I don't understand the change of injury listing. We'll see. And I could have used him tonight. They missed him badly, but that's all I have on that front. As for the players who did appear in this game, like I said, Mo Gay was the only one that did not play. That wasn't a surprise. In fact, I said that on Twitter before the game. Somebody asked me, and I said, if there's a player that does not play, it's going to be Mo Gay. And it was. Larry Nance Jr., 7 minutes. Was fine, 2 points, -1. But I said it before, I'll say it again. My number one takeaway for Larry Nance wasn't anything about Larry Nance. It was the fact that in this game, as shorthanded as they were, Quinn still, and he did it. He played Larry Nance out of necessity at the 4, but I think, again, that was almost like an announcement. Like, we're not doing this. I think he's a 5. And I've thought that the whole time, that he's more of a 5 than a 4, which I'm firmly convicted in. But tonight, I would have played him more, number one. And I think I was a little bit surprised, honestly, that he played as little as he did. So maybe that'll change. There's still always the possibility of a trade or something that shakes things up. But this is going back to the summer, like one of the questions that we had was, all right, you have these 3 centers. If you view them as centers, someone's going to not play, and it's probably going to be Larry Nance, and that's where we are at this point in time. So he played, he was fine, but that was my biggest takeaway from that. Keaton Wallace scored well, 8 points on 3 shots. Josh Keaton Wallace had 2 assists, played good defense. Like, I think other than Risacher and Trae in the first half and some Jalen stuff, he was not the best player, but like compared to projections, like he played very well. I was happy with that. I think the Hawks have to be happy with the way he played in this game in his first like real minutes at the NBA level. Darius Matthews, 6 points, 4 fouls, did have 2 steals, hit 2 threes, 2 assists. Defensively, it was rough, I got to say. But offensively, he just got to shoot even more than he did probably in this game to help them. Okongwu, not his best. I think in the first half, his first stint, it wasn't because of like him individually. The offense really clicked when he came in the game. I even made note of that on Twitter. Like, it was different when him and Clint, like, he was on the court. Offensively, it opened the floor up a little bit. And as a team in this game, the Hawks were better offensively in particular with Okongwu. But he was not very good. 1 of 5 from the floor, 0 of 4 from 3, did have 2 assists, but like just didn't make a huge impact. I didn't think, like, it's other than just not being like, he's not as sedentary as Clint is sometimes, but he was not a good game for either center, I would say. Speaking of the other center, Capella, 12 points on 7 shots, totally fine, actually pretty good. Had 5 rebounds, 2 turnovers, just didn't have a huge impact on defense. I'll say this. If you want an endorsement of Dyson Daniels, tonight was one of those. Like, I made the point all summer, and with myself and Glenn Willis and Tyler Jones, et cetera, on this podcast about how Dyson was going to make an impact on the bigs as well, because they actually have competent perimeter defense. And this game was a reminder that, like, when your perimeter defense dies, your centers are not superhuman. They don't have 2021 Capella. They don't have Rudy Gobert back there. Like, they have guys who can defend in Capella and Okongwu, but the perimeter was so bad, and they were not able to fix that on the back line, which is like what happened a lot of last season. David Roddy, mixed bag. Offensively, pretty good. 17 points, had an assist, 5 of 10 from the floor, 1 of 4 from 3, got to the line 6 times, like had some bully ball moments, and he's got some really good, interesting touch on offense, good passer in general. And defensively, he gave it all back. Like, I don't want to be overdoing it, but he was quite poor, I thought. Defensively, -9 in his 32 minutes. That's a lot of minutes for him. Risacher, one of the bright spots. 17 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal. He had 3 turnovers. Like, he had some rookie moments for sure, but he was 5 of 8 on 2s. 2 of 7 from 3 has not been great, but he got 7 up, which I was encouraged by, and he's actually shooting the ball a lot. And defensively, he was good. Like, he was the bright spot of defense along with Keaton. So I thought he was a positive night for Zach if you want to find a bright spot in this game. Jalen, it was a rough one on offense, I thought, for him, other than some like flashes, but 21 points, a career high, 17 rebounds for Jalen, but only 8 of 16 on twos, 1 of 5 on threes, and 2 of 5 at the free throw line. Right now, for whatever reason, he can't make a free throw all of a sudden. Did have 3 steals in the game, but some over helping, some defensive breakdowns like everybody else had in this one. He wasn't awful, nor was he good. Like he was just, for as good as the numbers look with 21 and 17, he wasn't as good as that indicates. Nor was he bad. It's just what it was. And then Trae, 35 points, 15 assists, 3 turnovers. If that's all I tell you, you think Trae played a perfect game. He played a near perfect half. He was awesome in the first half. He wore down for sure. I think he got tired. Quinn said that as well. He was not efficient. Well, he actually was reasonably efficient, but he was 8 of 15 on twos, which is actually decent for him for sure. 4 of 13 from 3 isn't awful, but isn't good. And then got to the line 7 times, made all 7, 2 steals. I think his defense slipped as the game went along. His offense got a little bit less potent. He was short on some shots, which I think Quinn said as well. I think he's like 4 or 5 shots in a row in the second half. He was just really short, and that's what happened when you get tired. But yeah, I mean, you saw it at times, like he was just cooking in the first half, but then it cooled off, and so went the Hawks basically on offense. They cooled off on that end of the floor, and it was still a defensive first loss, but offensively they're going to go as Trae goes, especially right now. And we know what's happened with Bogey and Bufkin and Krejci, at least for a while. The Hawks really, really, really need Dyson Daniels and or DeAndre Hunter like soon, because otherwise it gets real ugly real fast with the roster. And coming up, actually, I won't preview this game now necessarily, but the Hawks play again on Friday at home against Sacramento. The Kings are 2-2 this year. They had a rough start. They've actually played better in recent days. They're actually going to have the rest of it. They didn't play tonight though, so they're on the rest advantage coming in. That's their only visit to Atlanta this year for the Kings. And of course, the Hawks will have their eye on the Kings all year long for draft purposes. So that'll be an interesting showdown. And I won't have a full preview. In fact, unless something big happens on Thursday, I probably won't have an episode because I've overloaded. I've been doing extra shows, et cetera, et cetera. But if something big happens, I will spring into action. But in the meantime, probably no show in between now and Friday. But I will be back with a late night Friday edition of the Locked On Hawks podcast, breaking down everything from Hawks Kings. Speaking of, please subscribe to this podcast anywhere you find your podcast. I very much appreciate everybody's already done that. It is certainly, I'm gratified by it, and I'm very thankful for all the support. Please go ahead and subscribe and rate and review on Apple, on Spotify, on Overcast, on Amazon Music, etc. We're also on YouTube. Please like the video as you are watching this one and any video that we're doing on YouTube, plus subscribing, notifications, comments, shares, all that stuff. Please tell your friends about the podcast. Follow the show on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks. Follow the podcast there, but also follow my work if you want to on Twitter at BT Rowland. And my non-podcast work is at patreon.com/BT Rowland. A rough one for the Hawks, to be sure. Hopefully some context will at least ease some minds on to some level. But hey, it's 2-82 in the grand scheme of things if you want to find it that way. And more to come later on this week. I appreciate everybody listening to the podcast, and we'll see you all next time.